COVID has made an impact all over the world, and it has affected all of our lives, our communities, the way we work, and no industry has not been affected by the pandemic. However, I feel like COVID has particularly had a devastating effect on the educational community as well as the performing arts community.
Welcome to the Empowerment Zone with Ramona Houston, where we zone in on Black and Brown relations and our journey to empowering our communities.
I am so excited that we have Melvin Jones here as our guest today.
Morning.
Good morning. Melvin Jones is a Grammy Award winning musician. He's an arranger and he's an educator. He is from Memphis, Tennessee. He is a Morehouse College alumnus and a faculty member. He is also a faculty member at the U.S. Virgin Islands Department of Education and an artist in residency at Emory University here in Atlanta. And he's also a graduate of Mason Gross School of the Arts, which is a component of Rutgers University. Mr. Jones has recorded over 200 recordings on various media outlets, and he has appeared in multiple films and television shows. He's toured, performed, and or worked with these wonderful people: Tyler Perry, Patti LaBelle, PJ Morton, BBE All Stars Band, Dion Parsons, Young Jeezy, Penthouse Players Band, Band of producers, and many, many more. Welcome, Mr. Jones. I'm so happy to have you.
Glad I could be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm really excited about the topic that you're going to talk to us today. The artist and educator's life through and post COVID era. So before we get to talking about, because you are both an educator and a performing artist, before we get to our topic, can you please tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background so we can all get to know you a little bit better?
All right. Well, as stated before, I'm a professional trumpet player as well as a trumpet professor and a specialist in brass technique and pedagogy. I spent time as a collegiate band director, and during that time, it kind of enhanced what I consider to be my repertoire as a teacher. Enough so that since I resigned from that position back in 2010, I've been employed as artist in residence or as masterclass clinician, various fronts, various continents actually. And since things have expanded digitally, those requests seem to be much more numerous these days. And amongst those master classes, normally the things I would cover would be brass performance, jazz improv, music business, and sometimes into recording techniques, as well as being called upon to instruct on different techniques for, instructing a band and rehearsing a band, preparing for performance. And so I have a unique, I guess, perspective in, at least in my opinion, because most of the times when I accept certain engagements, especially in an educational front that are outside of my normal duties, I kind of make it a point to, I guess, tailor those requests to communities that I think actually need the service. You don't want to go to a hospital and treat doctors for something that they already know about. The idea is to reach out to people who actually need the information you're providing. And I think that that is that that's what I feel is more like a calling from an educational
Mhm.
point of view, and that's what's kept me involved in that particular realm since my resignation from that formal position of kind of authority more than anything else. Because now I serve in an adjunct capacity, still at my alma mater, but the mission is still the same to me. I would rather teach students that actually want and need the information rather than regurgitate information to students who have been getting it their entire lives. So,
So, how did you get into music? You say you're a trumpet player. I'm curious, how did you choose the trumpet of all the instruments?
you know, they say when it's right, it kind of chooses you.
Hmm.
When I was in elementary school, I progressed on the recorder. That was the instrument we were all, in
Hmm.
public school back in the day required to play. By the time I got to the age of joining band, I wanted to play saxophone, but the middle school band director at the time assigned me to play tuba. And once we went to visit the stores, and it was really kind of messed up. I was kind of a chubby kid at the time, so the thought was that that was the instrument that would
Yeah,
match.
exactly.
Kind of jacked up in hindsight. But when we went to when my parents and I tried to find a tuba, those things are expensive.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the next selection for me was supposed to be trombone. Again, still expensive at the time. So I happened upon a trumpet in the pawn shop, and my father bought it for me for $50 after tax. It was the worst piece of equipment you could imagine. The band director was disappointed that I came to school with the wrong instrument. But after a while, after she finally taught me how to make a sound on the instrument, I progressed on it to the point that it ended up just kind of picking me. I had no idea that that would be a part of my future. And just throughout my career, it's been cemented by one event or another, whether it be scholarship offers that didn't exist before, or whether it be performance opportunities that I never knew existed. And it was really firmed up for me while I was a student at Morehouse. Did a recording session for TLC during my sophomore year. And after getting that paycheck, um, you know, for that work, considering up until now, I didn't even think I would go to college. And up until now, the most I thought I could make was working at FedEx over the summers for like a good $13 an hour. I thought that was amazing. When they sent me the check for that 3 hours worth of session work, I figured this would be the career. And I didn't even know at the time I'd actually earned my first Grammy participation thing, having participated on that record. I had no idea about that until
Hmm.
maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Hmm.
So, yeah,
Isn't that something? Have those checks change your mind about a whole
I'm
bunch
telling
of
you,
things?
second you realize you can pay a bill with it, it becomes a job. That's all
So
right.
that must have been really exciting to at that moment to be on the TLC album because TLC was
Yeah.
one of the hottest groups at around that time.
That was 1998 when we did that recording. And at the
Hmm.
time, LaFace Records was actually here in Atlanta. It was
Hmm.
up in Buckhead.
Hmm.
So that first off, the experience of visiting there to fill out the paperwork
Hmm.
was exciting for me to
Hmm.
be there. And they
Hmm.
gave us a bunch of free Outcasts had just come out with Aquemini at the time.
Hmm.
So they gave us a bunch of advanced copies of that. But what was really trippy was riding down the road in my car, turning on back when we all used to listen to the radio and turning on the radio and hearing this song I played on, playing over the radios constantly, pulling up to a light and hearing it coming from the next car. And the song was, ironically, the song was No Scrubs. And the main lyric about the song is riding in your best friend's ride. So, it was another one of those interesting situations, but it was really, it really cemented for me what was possible in the industry. Because up until then, I had doubts, as any college student would. That,
So you started off performing, I mean, recording with TLC. So what was your decision to go into education? Like, why did you decide to do education and performing at the same time?
well, when I got to graduate school, the professors were very frank with us about what a career would mean in music. I was in the northeastern region. I was in New Jersey, and we were playing New York. And at the time, I was performing in a lot of party bands and big bands, all up and down the coast. And they were all very realistic with me. If you're going to do this as a living, you're going to need some way to supplement it just in case, because you have highs
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
employment and
Mm-hmm.
you have lows, and you need something to carry you across.
Mm-hmm.
Education was never in my educational background. I didn't take a bunch of courses to prepare for it. I took all courses geared towards performing. But I started to, I applied to be a substitute teacher while I was up in New Jersey. And I ended up with an adjunct position at Essex Community College. And that's when I realized that the way my professors dealt with me, the way that they all kind of instructed me was in a way that I needed to be able to instruct them on the same topics. So they kind of developed my teaching style. And with that, I didn't think that was, revolutionary or innovative or anything, but it seemed to really strike differently when it came to, to Black students, to people like me, to younger kids who may not have had an interest in a subject such as jazz. But because I was a younger person who could convey things, I grew up in the hip hop generation because I could convey things as it related to hip hop and jazz. That seemed to strike a different chord. And that's when I realized that this is something I could do. And then, lo and behold, 4 years after graduate school, I got the call to serve as head band director at Morehouse. And once I accepted that position, I was 24 years old. And so, if you can imagine what a normal 24-year-old is doing, it's not putting on that uniform and everything else that comes with that job, the duties, but that I was still able to reach other students because at this point, to them, I was kind of a combination of authority and peer.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, ironically, I came to take that job, and there were people I was in school with that were now, under my charge. That was a little strange at first, but I think that again was something that chose me because I never, in a million years, thought that I would be a teacher. But it seemed to be a position that fit because the way that I teach comes from a perspective of doing. It comes from more of a perspective like I was just in that chair that you're all sitting in now. So I can speak to that in a way that I think reached a little bit differently. So again, I think it's just something that chose me.
Interesting. So moving on to your topic and talking about how COVID has impacted both the education and performing arts community. How let's transition to that conversation and what the artist educator's life is right now during this. I think we're still in the pandemic, but people want to minimize it because I think for economic reasons. That's my opinion. Yeah. But talk about the artist and the educator's life, your topic.
Well, when we're first off, when you're dealing with COVID, I think the sense of normalcy that everybody's kind of longing for and that some people think they have, I still think it's more an imitation. I think it's more like commercialism or, it's just spending money. That's all it really is in the end. Money that people really don't even have yet. But to me, I see it as it being an imitation of what life was because there are still limitations now. There's still things that you can and cannot do. And I just had this conversation yesterday with a horn contractor. He wanted to hire some friends of mine to perform, but one of them had not been vaccinated yet. And that is already, that was the requirement for them to be able to participate. And that wasn't his requirement, mind you. That was on the agency that was booking it. And that is, going to become the kind of widespread norm. For me, I think as an artist, first off, I don't have much understanding for other artists outside of religious reasons who have an issue with this particular vaccination simply because if you've traveled the world, it was already a part of the job. If you've had to go to certain countries, you had to get a shot or you just weren't going and you weren't working there. Whatever check you were expecting, you're not getting. And when it comes to this particular shot, I hate that it wasn't advertised more, it's something that had been in the works for years and this was an opportunity to use it. I think a lot of times it was put on the public as if this was something that just came up as a response to this particular pandemic rather than being something that had already been worked out in various laboratories around the world for years of development. And this was an opportunity I could see the hesitancy because it wasn't something that exactly was on human trials. But at this point, we're far enough into it now to dispel certain arguments. And so when it comes to a professional point of view, I'm like, well, in the end, this is still a part of the job now. to work in a school, you have to have record of your shots.
Mhm, mhm.
So I think that the people who are hesitant or still kind of subscribe to certain theories, they're going to have a really difficult time moving forward because it's not going anywhere. This is going to be a part for a while of the career of our life, our culture. Masks are going to be a part of it for a while. The idea of providing proof in order to work, that's going to be a part of it for a while. And that goes to both the performer and the educator's point of view. Morehouse is returning to in-person classes, this coming fall, and the requirements are out there as they are at so many institutions that you have proof of something, of either your vaccination or your official reason for not being vaccinated before being allowed to serve on campus in the presence of other people's children. I think what this pandemic did more for anything else, when you talk about educators and artists, is revealed certain things. It revealed where values really lie. It revealed how much people really care about this job, or how much they care about the people that they work with. Because now it's starting to kind of weed out a field that I thought was huge before. But I think my biggest concern in moving forward is that once the weeding out is done, like, what are we left with now?
Mhm.
Now that you understand the value in your job, is that going to translate into how you do your job and the kind of arrangements you make, or even the things that you accept? It's an interesting place to be right now, because not everybody's on the same page, but we're all still forced to move forward together.
So, for our audience, can you expand on what you mean by weeding out?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about education first off. Um, when COVID first hit and we were forced to switch over into a digital format, now there was exposure to what a teacher's actual, I guess, not even ideology, but what their particular skill sets were when it came to the
Mhm,
classroom,
mhm, mhm,
because it all
mhm.
had to translate a different way from in-person classing to
Right,
digital
right,
class.
right, right, right.
All of a sudden you have to write down everything you say and make sure that it's there. And now you find out maybe a couple teachers that couldn't spell. There are
Mhm,
certain
mhm,
things that
mhm,
now
mhm,
are, I think, exposed. So that weeded out the people who were serious about that career, as
mhm,
opposed to the people that this may have been a fallback.
mhm,
That was first. Second, there's a certain kind of patience that comes with being a teacher
mhm.
in any level. I think a lot of times people believe that beyond the K through 12 level, that there's some loosening of restrictions, or there's some kind of freedom that exists, and that's not at all cute. That's not true. You're still abiding by certain rules. You still have to deal with various personalities, and you still have to be effective no matter what
Mhm,
their personalities dictate.
mhm, mhm.
So once we get into the digital sense, I can recall times in which I had to tell students, it's like, hey, look, I realize you're at home,
Yep.
but this is a classroom. You need the dresses if you're in class. You can eliminate whatever distractions. I can hear the TV in the background.
Mhm.
Turn the TV off. You're in class. It's just certain things that come with this that weigh just as heavily on a person's, patience as it would in class telling a kid to take their hat off in the building.
Mhm.
So I think, like I said, this weeded out the ones who were in it for the right reason in the first place,
Mhm.
because the level of dedication that it takes to try to keep the attention of young people
Yep.
online, that's a lot. It's a whole lot. And for me personally, I had to both teach those courses and participate in my kids virtual online.
Mhm.
This is the most I've been able to be involved with their educational experiences, and seeing what it's like for the teachers, the K through 12 teachers that are dealing with a bunch of like 8-year olds and 5-year olds, and it's to see what it takes to make that work. Again, you have to be serious, you have to
Mhm.
be dedicated, and you have to be flexible, because nobody expected to have to do this.
So, what about the weeding out in the performing arts community?
That part gets really interesting. When it comes to the performing arts community now, kind of the same principle: those who were serious about the career in the first place, as opposed to those who just kind of fell into it. When everything went digital, again, this was exposure of what you really could and could not do. not even just as a musician, but just as a practitioner of the art itself. Because if you've decided to take on music as a career, whatever your medium is, if you're a singer, if you're a trumpet player like myself, you're not just that. If you're deciding to be a professional musician, as a musician, you are the CEO of a business that's yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be a publicist, you have to be a booking agent, you have to be a videographer, a social media expert, so many things that come with that. I think once people were forced to sit down and kind of recreate their careers, this is when you find out it's like, oh, maybe all of those things I put on my resume I didn't actually do. Maybe I padded a little because now I have to actually do it. Maybe the education that I said I have doesn't show now that it's required of me to use those particular skills. And so I think it weeded out a lot of people, because if you weren't serious about this before, the second those jobs dried up, there's some people that have gone into construction now, agriculture, the food industry. There's a lot of career changes that happened over the course of this. Now, that's not to say that they weren't deserving of the career itself, but that is to say that in real life, simply put, favor is not fair. If this is a job that has chosen you, then it's a certain type of suffrage that comes with it. And if for whatever reason you're not able to endure that, then the career will make some decisions for you that you may not want to make. I think that's what happened. I've seen a lot of people who I thought were phenomenal players who have not seen their horn since before COVID.
Wow. Do you kind of blame that on the individuals, or I mean, because it kind of sounds like you're saying they're not committed, but maybe they were put into some situations where they had to make some life choices. I'm just curious about your perspective.
Well, I'll put it like this: I can't say it's the blame of the artists themselves, because I'll say it's the blame of the art, because the art chooses. A person can't decide to become famous. They can't decide to be successful. There's a long and zigzaggy road to get you there. And whatever the case, who's to say this isn't a pause in someone's, path? I don't know that. All I know is that the field has thinned out. And in that thinning out, there are some people who probably shouldn't have been doing this in the first place. And there are some people who I feel deserve another chance. And, that field is mixed, but that field is what reality looks like in any field. But you said an interesting thing about how this particular, how the industry was hit with COVID a little bit harder. And I 100% agree, because when you're dealing as a musician, it's already a service-oriented position. No matter how people say they're playing for themselves or whatnot, if there's no audience there, you won't be playing. That's just the way it works. So you're serving someone. If there's no one purchasing your product and there's no way to finance your career, then you won't be playing. So in the end, you're still serving a greater community. How you take that service generally tends to dictate, whether you call it karma, spirituality, but how seriously you take that tends to dictate what comes your way. And if you're prepared for those opportunities, then maybe it'll work out better in your favor. The odds at least are better. But again, the career is so multifaceted. I think what this did, what this entire lockdown and everything did, was force people to, I guess, enhance other parts of the career, not necessarily just let go. Like, you may not be playing as much, but now you have to deal with the other things that were already a part of the job and that were going to increasingly become more of a part. That whole digital aspect was always going to become a part of the job,
Yeah, I agree with you on the fact that, one of the things about COVID in the performing arts is the fact that you perform in front of groups. Groups are going to be the last place to come back.
Yes.
When you talk about the theater, when you talk about festivals, when you talk about events, people are not really ready yet. I mean, some people, like you said, are trying to create this facade that is, we're back, but it's really not 100% yet. And not even close anywhere. And so you talk about, the fact that these places are disappearing, you
Hmm.
know, because or opportunities are disappearing because you don't have the places to serve like you did
Hmm.
before.
Right.
But I want to kind of talk to you about the fact that you said the weeding out of these individuals,
Hmm.
that they're very talented, but wouldn't you say it's more so, I think this is what you were applying, they don't have the other skill sets needed. Like you
It's
can be
different.
a
Yeah.
great player and
Hmm.
not know how to run a business, you know
Right.
what I mean? Or
Hmm.
do all the social media and all the
Yeah.
digital things. You just want to play. You
Right.
don't want to be dealing with
You
all
don't.
the other
You
stuff.
don't. But it is an inevitable part. And I think
Ah, okay.
what what's interesting about it, and I guess this is a twofold kind of point. But like you said, those other skills, when before COVID, the industry was very heavy with individuals that from an artistic point of view may have been lacking, but from
Mm-hmm.
a business point of view
Agreed.
were very savvy and they were
Agreed.
winning because of it.
Yeah, agreed.
What's interesting is those same people did not necessarily come out on top during COVID,
Wow.
because once it became digital, the business of getting people into the room was no longer the big thing. The business was now, what are they going to see while they're sitting at home with nothing else to do, watching you? So a lot of the artistic portion that started to shine through a little more. I
Mm-hmm.
appreciated that. There was
Mm-hmm.
some amazing music that was made during COVID. Some people that didn't even know kind of discovered that spark. That maybe they've been putting down for the sake of commercialization for so long. They
Mm-hmm.
finally found their own voices. So I hope that carries on past COVID. But there's a catch-22, as you mentioned, with venues and audiences. The fact is, as it returns, like you said, the crowd is the last portion to return. But the I guess the scarier part about that is who gets first dibs.
Wow.
Because what you're gonna have is the
Mm-hmm.
larger names, your
Mm-hmm.
bigger artists
Mm-hmm.
vying for the exact same venues and
Mm-hmm.
audiences that your local artists are vying for.
Mm-hmm.
And so who gets priority? You can have just a 50 seat club that may have Jill Scott there because she's decided she wants to perform, and that will put Joe Schmo out of
Mm-hmm.
out of
Mm-hmm.
whack. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious to see as things return, because they are returning kind of ish. I've done a couple of in person performances lately, and I've turned down a lot of in person performances just because I don't 100% trust the scene myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when it's all said and done, those performances, I'm not getting a bunch of calls for, my friends putting together their bands to do this. I'm getting calls with them going with some major artists,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to the same size venues. So I just wonder, like, how it's going to look when that particular portion of the industry, the venues, the promoters, the booking agencies, what's the major, when Ticketmaster gets involved. I just wonder what it's going to look like now, because a lot of artists have now gotten a sense of their worth. They've gotten a sense of where they should be and the things that they should be able to demand. I feel like a lot of people, though, are missing out on that opportunity to get those things just for the sake of getting back out there for these 40% crowds. So
Mm-hmm.
I would hope that there would be a change, but we all know that trickle down doesn't really work so well here.
Mm-hmm.
And for there to be a change, it would have to trickle down from the top earners to the
Mm-hmm.
bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones from which are the agencies, which are the ones that hold the monopoly, it would have to trickle down from them, and I'm not seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I just wonder how we're going to come out of this thing. We're not out of it, like you said. It's this. I don't think we're out of it. No matter how much you want to claim victory, there's still a rampant rash of ignorance where life in general is concerned. And when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to just safety, I mean, if I'm being honest, I would have been with this 6 foot wear a mask thing long before the pandemic, because
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing it revealed. People be really dirty,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
really nasty folks out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so if washing your hands is a problem, then yeah, this probably needed to happen, because one result of COVID is there's not a big flu pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
not a huge outbreak of the common cold like it would normally be. So again, I think it's just revealed so many things just about us as people. And when it comes to artists and educators, I say weed it out, and I don't want to make it seem like that is some kind of voluntary thing.
or survival of the fittest.
It's kind of Darwinism. Yeah, it's Darwinism in the arts, and it's and fittest has been redefined. It's no longer
Hmm.
about the cat who could play the best, and it's no longer about the guy who can just who can advertise himself the best.
Hmm.
Now there has to be some more substance to it to get someone's attention.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
And that's the interesting thing about this whole pandemic is how it just reshuffled everything.
yeah,
And when you talk about, for example, you use the example of Jill Scott playing to a 50-person audience, for her to even consider doing that is
right,
amazing. That wouldn't have been an option before the pandemic. And now those people who were playing those venues may not have the opportunities for a long
exactly.
while,
Yeah,
so I mean, you make some important points and observations. So moving forward, what um, strategies or advice would you give to educators and performing artists in moving through this era until we um, I mean, just moving through this era, because whatever it becomes, it's going to be different than what it was
it's much
before.
different.
It's not going to
Uh,
be the same. We're not going back to where we were before 2000.
right, which may
Uh,
be a good thing.
mm,
It may be a good thing. I don't know.
mm-hmm,
I think the first step, the most important thing, this is yet another lesson from COVID times, is involvement. You know, there's no way to downplay um, the rise of, I guess, participation in politics on a national scale. And at the same token, with that particular awareness, I think people started to see that, there's an illusion of power and then there's actual power.
mm-hmm,
Um, while one person may not be able to affect things the way they thought they could, everyone, in the same direction affects things, as evidenced by Black Lives Matters and some
mm-hmm,
things that have
mm-hmm,
changed as a result of those types of movements. So I would say that same level of involvement is necessary if you want to see changes in the
mm-hmm,
educational community,
mm-hmm,
because those decisions are not made by educators. They're not made by people with classroom experience. They're made by people who kind of view it in its best sense, in its most altruistic sense. They view it as a way of spending money responsibly.
mm-hmm.
In its worst sense, they view it as a way of using that money the way they think it should be used.
Yep.
So either way, it still ends up being a money thing. And if anyone, Black people in particular, know this particular lesson, there's no money in the cure. It's stated by Chris Rock.
Mm-hmm,
So when we look at our ailments, there's
mm-hmm,
definitely more money, available to state that this needs to be handled. But that doesn't necessarily mean the money's going to be spent that way.
mm-hmm,
So let's take education, for example. For the longest, I used to hold the same common opinion that the problem with education was a lack of funding. I used to think that for the longest time until I actually took a look at the numbers. So it turns out that the places that need the money most, money has been shifted. I'm talking millions and billions of dollars, but you do not see that by the time you go to these schools in those districts. The money's not being used that way.
mm,
And that's where I think the level of involvement has to change, because you got to be aware that it's not a shortage of money. The money is there, but it's not being spent for that. It's
mm-hmm,
not being used for that. It's not being allocated. And there are various reasons from district to county that that's the case. But that is, in fact, the case. And so I think if the people that are being hurt most by it were the ones that were involved just a little bit more, then maybe that needle could move.
mm-hmm,
But the issue is that there's it's just like most things when it comes to politics and money, there's a kind of a wool that's been
mm-hmm,
thrown over our eyes. There's the sheet there that tells us, well, if we use this money this way, what is the benefit?
mm-hmm,
So they're looking for the immediate. There's no such thing as an immediate benefit when you're talking
mm-hmm,
about education.
mm-hmm,
Like, you learn today so that you can use it somewhere way down the
mm-hmm,
line.
mm-hmm,
So if they want to measure the benefits of spending this money, that's a curve that has to go over at least one graduating class. So you're looking at
mm-hmm,
least 4 years before you see the first inkling of
mm-hmm,
an effect of making a decision. Now, they're not going to do that. So the money just sits there, collects, then goes back and comes right back again. And they say, hey, we still have this problem. And it's like, well, you didn't fix the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So why should we give you the money now? Well, because I can fix it now. I have a new strategy. So here's the
Mm-hmm.
money. And it sits there, and it's a vicious cycle that repeats from one administration to the next. But I think if that particular cycle could be broken just by kind of in I guess getting involved in what happens on the local level, because that all has to do with who's in positions of power
Mm-hmm.
right in your neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
right down the street. Those are the people. We're all focused on Washington. For the most part, Washington has done whatever it's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
it has to happen here. So that's from an education point of view, even from an arts point of view. Now that I've been asked to sit on the Grammy board, at least 2 or 3 times in 2 or 3 cycles, and I can never do it before because I could not commit to the scheduling that comes with that. COVID changed that for me. It
Mm-hmm.
gave me a little more availability because most of the meetings are digital. And with that being the case, now that I could get involved with that, it's the same problem when it comes to the artistic community. There are decisions being made by people that are not even musicians, that impact all musicians, even within that. And I'm like, yo, this is something that would be really obvious to the musicians that are practitioners of this if they only knew. But when they start going down the rosters, those rosters are not necessarily comprised of us, of working musicians. So they don't have that viewpoint at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see that changing now. There are a lot of, there are differences now from this last election cycle, even within the Grammy board itself, that I think kind of permeate to other artistic and musical organizations. But I would just say again that if they want to see some change, they got to get involved in making it known that they want to see those changes.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times complaints stop right here. And that's the end. Or it stops with like a meme or some repost that does nothing. They need to see some bodies. They need to receive correspondence. Their phone needs, that it's all still some of the basic things that you would do before COVID. The only difference is that right now there may be somebody on the other line to hear it because they don't have anything else to do.
Mm-hmm. And you make an important point about power is that we all have to be involved if we want to see change.
Yeah,
That change, you have to keep pushing for change. It doesn't happen just in a one-off. It
right.
is the continuous process. We know that economics is global, politics is local. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to be involved in the local level, and even these boards, when you look at, uh, the arts community,
Oh yeah.
we have to really push to make sure our voices are heard and the perspectives are heard
Mm-hmm.
from musicians who are actually the people we're dealing with. So that's all about power. And as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without demand. So it
True.
always have to be a demand
Correct.
to do this work. So, Mr. Jones, if anybody would like to get in contact with you and learn more about you and your work, could you share with our audience how they would reach you?
Yeah. I guess the easiest way is digitally now because I don't really go many places. But the email to my website, melvinjones.net. The email is simply info@melvinjones.net. That's the best and most consistent way to reach me. I have a lot of mobile devices, but my kids generally have them too. So that's one of the few things I know that I can always get to.
Okay, great. Info@melvinjones.net.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really enjoyed your hearing your perspectives, and we wish you the best as you re-enter the classroom this fall, as
All right.
well as re-entering in terms of the performing arts.
Thank you.
Hi, now we're moving on to our segment of providing strategies for college success. And Mr. Jones, can you tell us what college or colleges did you attend? What were your major or majors, and what strategy would you give students in order to ensure that they succeed in college?
All right. Well, I attended my undergrad at Morehouse College here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I went on to get my master's degree at Rutgers University, Mason Gross School of the Arts. Both of my degrees were in music. One was in general music, and my master's degree was in jazz performance specifically. And what I would tell students, like Morehouse was a different was a different kind of experience for me, because you would be there with teachers who may have a building named after them, or may have, written the book that you're using. And so each subject would be treated as if that was your subject. So you had to, no matter how, if you weren't that interested in philosophy and you were a business major, you're going to have to become a little more interested in philosophy to be able to pass that course. So my strategy when it comes to both graduates, well, let's start with undergraduate. You're it's a wide field, and finding focus is the hardest thing to do, because most time, by the time you're in college, you may not really know what you want to do just yet, or you'll have an idea, but you'll take a class and you realize, I didn't realize there was so much math involved in this. I think I want to do something different, and that happens often. My biggest advice to college students, first off, is to make sure that you handle your core curriculum classes to the best of your ability to start, because those classes that are within your particular discipline, if you change your discipline somewhere throughout your matriculation, then those classes shift and you'll have to retake those courses. There's nothing worse than having to adjust your schedule to change both core curriculum and your particular discipline at the same time. So I would say, your gyms, your English, whatever your particular liberal situation is, liberal arts situation, to make sure that those core curriculum classes are as heavy as possible during the beginning of your time there, so that that leaves you freedom to explore other areas once you get into your junior and senior year. Also, with doing that, time management is super important. At all levels of life in general, college provides you with at least a little bit more cushion before you get to real life, so that you can decide, that this is the hour I'm devoting to this. This is the hour devoted to this, and this will be my free time. To schedule your free time more than anything else. Don't just have free time. That's the worst thing you can do in college. Idle, that is a setup. So, just to, if nothing else, to schedule your free time so that it puts everything else in perspective. The other thing that does is that gives you what I believe is an important life skill, and that is to I guess really apply yourself to things whether you like them or not. Because the inevitability of any career, even if you love the career, there are going to be things you don't like to do, as we were talking about from the artistic side. So if you can devote yourself in a certain way to still accomplish that thing to the best of your ability, whether you like it or not, that's going to translate into your professional life and your adult life in general. Because I always grew up, with the thought that the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. So, a person, if you walk up and their car is dirty, more than likely their house is dirty. So, the idea is just that if you treat this right, then it'll automatically make you treat the things that count right. Graduate school is a different beast, and I stopped at my master's degree. But when it comes to a master's program, specifically in the arts, most of your time is spent with whoever your principal teacher is, or whatever that main thing that you're pursuing. That's the bulk of your time. Those core curriculum classes become a lot less, but are equally important. The lesson I had to learn the hard way is, once again, to value those core curriculum fields. Because the things that I'm doing now as an educator, I do a lot more composition, I do a lot more arranging, a lot more digital recording. These are things that were part of the curriculum, but because my major was jazz performance, I didn't view them as being as important. If I had known then what I know now, that the bulk of my career consists of those things that I did not necessarily prioritize when I was in the program, that would be my advice to my younger self. Maybe you should listen when they start talking about computers. So again, this I think it's the same, still dealing with core curriculum, but because it's less, it seems like less of a priority. Don't fall into that trap. It all matters. So that's my main advice. I mean, it's all about time commitment and just personal commitment more than anything else.
Love this advice. For undergraduate students, make sure that you take your core curriculum courses first.
Oh yeah.
Not don't get into your major yet, because you're still trying to figure out who you are and what you want to do, and make sure that you master the skill of time management. That's going to be extremely important to your success. For all you graduate students, Same advice. But he's saying, Mr. Jones is saying, make sure you value your core curriculum classes because they're going to be very important to your career. So don't take them lightly, is what he's saying.
Don't mess up.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Jones. It's a pleasure having you again, Melvin Jones, wonderful educator and performing artist. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Definitely a pleasure.
A special thank you to the incredible team of the Empowerment Zone. Terry Gully, theme song. NADWorks, digital support, and of course, our featured guest.
If you enjoyed my podcast, please subscribe. We are on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Be sure to rate us on Apple Podcasts too. Thank you for your continued support.